So May.
What am I doing? I just told her that I don't know if they're considered, I don't really know what that is. I just wanted one of my hair was cool. Yeah. We'll see.
Oh, it's really expensive in Rockland. I'm paying at least $70 more.
Oh my god, the two of us was $5.50.
That's
It was ridiculous.
But you got your hair done in LA too? I can't hear it.
There's something for people. Starts it's a
Okay, good morning, everyone. Boker Tov. Thank you all for joining. And this is the first in a series entitled Practical Spirituality. So, our first topic today is, can people really change? And I could answer I think you all know the answer. In one word, the answer is yes. But there's a lot to explore, obviously, on this topic. So let me begin with a story, a very powerful story about change. And this is a story that was told by Rabbi Abraham Twersky. You may have heard of Rabbi Abraham Twersky. He was a renowned psychiatrist who devoted his life to mental health, but specifically in the area of drug addiction, which may be one of the most difficult areas to change from, to break an addiction, because obviously an addiction is a negative habit that has become deeply ingrained in a person. And that's the ultimate change, is breaking out of addiction. So he dealt with the subject of change a great deal. And he tells a story that happened in his rehab center. He worked in the numerous, throughout his career in his rehab centers. He happened to be a Hasidic Jew with, Hasidic garb, but he was a Harvard graduate. And he wrote many, many books. You could pick up his books anywhere. Does everyone hear? Is the sound okay? Okay. So he wrote, if at any time the sound isn't good, please somebody let me know. He wrote many books on addiction and on many other subjects. I think he's authored, maybe over 50 books in his lifetime. He passed away a number of years ago. But he tells the following story. Sound is faint, I'm being told. Is everyone's sound faint? No. Okay, so it's good for most people. Okay, maybe you just have to turn up your volume. So he tells the following story, that he was in a drug court, doing a therapy session, speaking to young adults who in rehabilitation. And he was talking about the importance of having self-esteem, how having a positive self-image is very critical and instrumental and important in the recovery process. And after he gave his lecture, there was a question and answer. And a young man by the name of Avi, who happened to be an Israeli, stood up, and he worked in a lot of non-Jewish clinics as well. He didn't just work in Jewish clinics, obviously. And Avi said, Rabbi, I really loved, or doctor, he was Rabbi Dr. Abraham Twersky. I really liked your lecture about the importance of self-esteem as a part of the process of growth and change. But my question is, how am I supposed to have self-esteem? He said, I had a very good life, happily married, children, had a good job. And unfortunately, I got involved in drugs, and one thing led to another. And then I started stealing to feed my habit. And now, unfortunately, I've hit rock bottom, and I'm in this drug rehab center. I lost my job. I lost the trust with my wife. My children are embarrassed of me. I don't have any money left to my name. I can't even send my children, birthday presents because I'm penniless. And I feel like I've destroyed my whole life because of the choices I've made. So how could I respect myself? How could I have a positive self-image when I know I've caused so much pain and damage in my life, and it was all my doing? And Rabbi Abraham Twersky said to him, Avi, you ever walk by a jewelry store? And he said, when you walk by the jewelry store, you look in the window and you see a beautiful diamond ring, and it's sparkling and it's gorgeous. And if you ask yourself, how did that diamond ring get there? He says, when that diamond was excavated from the ground, it was a cold black stone. And they took it out of the earth and they cleaned it, and then they polished it, and then they cut it, and then they set it in a beautiful gold ring, and then they put it in a beautiful velvet box, and then they put it in the window with a beautiful spotlight on it. And now when you walk by the window and you look in the jewelry store, it takes your breath away because of its beauty. But it didn't start out that way. It started out as a black stone in the ground. He says, you may feel like that black stone in the ground, but what we're going to do here in this process is we're going to clean you up. We're going to polish you. We're going to set you in a beautiful setting, and you will be the sparkling diamond. And that's the way he answered his question. Rabbi Twersky says that the very next day, they got a call at the rehab center. This fellow called and said, my mother just passed away. My sister and I are here cleaning up the apartment, and we have a lot of furniture we want to get rid of. We know you have this rehab center. Would you like, do you need any furniture? We want to donate it. And Rabbi Twersky said, actually, we just built an addition to the rehab center. We built a game room, and we could use some furniture. If you have couches, if you have lamps, if you have bookcases, we could take it. She says, great, send over some, if you have a way to pick it up, we're happy to give it to you. So Rabbi Twersky gets a few young guys in the rehab center, and he tells them we need to pick up some furniture. He tells them to rent a U-Haul and go pick up this furniture. These young guys go to the address, they knock on the door, they go up the steps, they start taking the furniture down into the truck to bring back to the rehab center. Avi picks up the sofa seat, this sofa chair, and he's carrying it down the steps when suddenly an envelope slips out from underneath the cushion. He puts down the chair and he opens the envelope and he sees a stack of $100 bills. He starts counting it. It's $5,000. Apparently, this woman kept a little cash underneath her sofa seat. And Avi is thinking to himself, I could really use this money. My bank account is overdrawn. I haven't bought my kids anything. I would love to send them something, And he says the woman is not alive anyways. It's not like she needs the money, and she's not going to miss it. And he's really struggling. And suddenly he remembers what Rabbi Twersky said the day before. When Rabbi Twersky said, Avi, you are a diamond, and we are going to polish you, and you're going to be a sparkling, beautiful diamond. You may look like you're a black stone in the earth, but you're going to be beautiful. And he remembered those words, and he said to himself, I'm not a thief. I'm an honest person. I can't do that. And he went back up the steps, and he knocked on the door, and he said to the son, I found this underneath the cushion. It fell out from the chair. It must have been your mom's. Here it is. And he hands back the $5,000. They finish loading the truck. They come back to the rehab center. They furnish the room. And the next day, the young man and his sister come by the rehab center to see Rabbi Twersky. And they meet with him and they say, we're so glad you're able to use the furniture from our mom. And Rabbi Twersky thanks them. And at that point, he tells them the story of Avi and how he returned the $5,000. And the young man and the sister say, we decided that we want to donate this $5,000 to the rehab center. And we want to donate it in honor of Avi for what he did. Rabbi Twersky says he took the $5,000, thanked them, and he used that $5,000 to paint the room and get it ready and finish it up. And then he put a plaque on the door of the room, outside the door, that said, this game room is dedicated in honor of Avi, a polished diamond. So, of course, people can change. And there's nothing more beautiful than watching a person make changes in their life, especially when they're really noticeable changes. And there's nothing more meaningful in life, in our own lives, when we could look back and say, I'm not the person I was. I've changed. And it's so important to believe in the possibility of change, because if you don't believe you can change, obviously you're not going to attempt to change. That's number one. But number two is, if you don't believe you can change, you're not going to believe that other people can change. And therefore, you're not going to give other people a chance to change. We have a terrible expression that people often say. There are a lot of terrible expressions, but one of them, you hear people say, I got his number. I have him all sized up. I think it was George Burns who once said, the only person I know, smart person I know, is my tailor, because every time I come to buy a suit, he takes a new measurement. We all grow, we all change. Sometimes people don't talk to people for 10 years, 20 years because of something they did. And it could be what they did was really terrible. But maybe in the past 10 years, they've changed. Maybe they've grown. Give them a chance. Someone said forgiveness is giving someone the space to become the type of person that would have never done that to you in the first place. So therefore, there's nothing more beautiful in our own lives to be able to say, I made meaningful change in my life. And you could be proud of that change. And there's nothing more beautiful than giving someone else the opportunity to show you that they can change, and giving them the opportunity. And that's what the Rambam says teshuva is. Teshuva is, I'm not the same person, or that person is no longer the same person that committed that original offense, because they've changed. And a matter of fact, the Torah portions we're reading now is about Joseph and the brothers. Joseph is the tzaddik. He's the paradigm of the perfectly righteous person. Yehuda is the Baal Teshuva, the person who changed. Remember how Judah started off. He was the one who said, why just let Joseph die in the pit? Let's sell him as a slave, so at least we'll make some money. We'll make a profit. 22 years later, Judah is the one who says to the viceroy of Egypt, I'll become a slave, but let Benjamin go home. In other words, the brother who sold his baby brother into slavery because it was Rachel's son is now the brother who says, I'll be a slave in place of Benjamin. He made the full turnaround. He did complete teshuva. Instead of selling his brother into slavery, he protected and defended his brother from slavery. And therefore, Yehuda is the paradigm of the one who is a repentant, who changes. Took him 22 years, but he changed. And that's why he is the king of all the brothers. All the kings of Israel, King David, King Solomon, all are descendants of Judah, because Judah had the ability to change. And the word Yehudah, which we're all called Yehudim, comes from the word to admit, to acknowledge. The first step in change is admitting, being honest with yourself. Many people don't change because they're simply in denial. The first barrier you have to break through in order to change is be honest with yourself. Yesterday, we had a speaker in the shul who quoted Winston Churchill, who said, you have to face the facts because the facts are facing you. Sometimes we don't want to face the facts. The first step in any process is acknowledging, admittance, recognition, taking responsibility. In Judaism, we call it vidui, to confess, to admit what you've done wrong. And before we launch into the subject of change, I just want to make one very fundamental point. Change is not just for certain people who need to change. Every person has to change. Why is that? There's a great line, I must have repeated it many times. One of our kids came home from school as a child and said, they heard a riddle in school. And the riddle was, they said, Tati, they call me Tati, what's the biggest room in the world? And after thinking, I said, I don't know, what's the biggest room in the world? And they said, the room for change. There's always room for change. There's always room for improvement. So it doesn't have to mean that, I have to change my life like Avi, I have to go from being a drug addict to being a good person. Or it doesn't mean that I have to be like Judah, that I sold my brother into slavery and now I have to change. No matter what level you're on, there's always a level you could aspire to. There's always change. And one of the unfortunate things in life is that if a child was the same child at age 10 as they were at age 5, that would be a tragedy, right? Because from 5 to 10, you expect your child to change dramatically. If your child was as mature as they were as 15 at the age of 20, and you didn't see any change in them from 15 to 20, it would be a tragedy. What do you mean? 5 years from 15 to 20, they didn't mature at all, they didn't grow. But if someone is 45 and they get to 50 and the same level of maturity, we think, oh, well, we finished the process of growth and change. That's when, till 25, you're changing. In other words, every stage of life shouldn't be a slowing down of change. It should continue the process of change. It doesn't matter if you're 65 going to 70, every year, every decade should bring dramatic change, just like a child from 10 to 20 makes dramatic change. So this class is not for people who need to change, like certain people who are terrible people who have to make changes. Every person has to change constantly, because if you're not getting out of your comfort zone, you're not changing, you're not growing. And Judaism is all about growing. It's all about climbing the rung, Jacob's ladder, right? With the ladder that spans from heaven to earth. We all have to be constantly growing to the next level. So now let's talk about change. And getting back to the question is, can people really change? Because that's the harder question. Can you really change? We have a lot of expressions, again, pessimistic expressions, like you can't teach an old dog new tricks, or, a leopard can't change its spots, All these expressions are negative. They're basically saying you're doomed. You are who you are. You're never going to change. You can't become someone new. So the first thing you have to understand that the word for teshuvah, which is repentance, we have an English expression, turn over a new leaf. And by the way, this is a perfect class for this week, because the one time a year that all Americans think about change is New Year's. It's a new year. I'm going to change. Now, a lot of the changes are, I'm going to go to the gym and lose weight. I'm going to make more money this year. I'm going to, the mostly materialistic things. But it's really a time, we do this on Rosh Hashanah, on our Jewish New Year. How could I be a more loving person, a more compassionate person, a more empathetic person, a more generous person, a more inspiring? How could I be a better Jew? How could I come closer to God? How could I be a better father, mother, husband, brother, son, daughter? That's the real resolutions we should make. And those are the areas we should really seek to change. And again, change doesn't have to be dramatic. Change could be and should be incremental. We'll talk about that, God willing. But let's talk about the whole idea of change. So there's two parts to change: external and internal. There is a change of character, which is internal, and a change of behavior, which is external. So obviously, it's much more difficult to change internally than to change externally. Externally, we could change right now, immediately. That we could do immediately. So, for example, let's take generosity and charity. Is generosity and charity one and the same? Not necessarily. I could be charitable and not generous. I could be generous and not charitable. I could be a very generous person, but I maybe don't have a lot of money to give charity. I could be a very wealthy person and give a lot of charity, but I'm not doing it out of generosity. I'm doing it out of name recognition, honor, tax deductions, whatever other reasons, right? Generosity is an internal state of being. I'm a generous person, and it's not just about money. I'm generous with my judgment of others. I'm generous with my compassion. I'm generous with my empathy. I'm generous in spirit. I'm a generous person. Versus a stingy person who is selfish. Charitable is the behavior, because now the ideal situation is I'm a generous person and therefore I give charity out of my generosity. Then the action, which is the behavior, the charity, is inspired by the internal character trait of generosity. And this applies to every area of life. So there's a term in America, anger management, right? Somebody has an anger problem, they got to go to anger management courses. But think about what you're saying. We're going to manage the anger. Why manage it? Why not change the anger? Why not undo the anger? Managing the anger is a good thing. Don't act angrily, right? But the real goal is to undo where is that anger coming from, so that you're not an angry person in the first place, rather than just manage it. Now, obviously, it's better to manage something than not manage it, because others don't have to be the victim of your anger. But the real goal is to do the internal work of not getting angry in the first place. So that's the internal part. Now, how do you do the more difficult work of changing internally? Because that's the ultimate goal, to change internally. It's much easier to change externally. Not much easier. Even that's difficult, to change your behaviors. But what you really want to change is your character, not just your behavior. So how do you do that? So Judaism and Jewish thoughts explains that there are two components to our internal makeup. There is the mind, intellect, and then there's the emotions. Now, obviously, our emotions are guided by our intellect. In other words, your comprehension of something is what gives birth to the emotions. So if I understand that something is good for me, I'm drawn towards it. I'm attracted to it. I want more of it because I understand that it's good. The minute I explain to you that that's bad for you, you avoid it. You flee from it. Because your mind now understands that it's not really good for you. So the first step in change internally is comprehension, learning, understanding, consciousness. The more you think about something, the more it affects your emotions. So let's go back to anger. The first thing that we have to do is take responsibility for our anger. And I'm using anger. We could talk about jealousy. We could talk about anything, okay? But I'm just showing you the process of how it's done. The first thing is you have to take responsibility for your actions. You can't blame others, because the one of the impediments to change is, well, it's not my fault. So take anger. People will say, well, they got me so angry. You made me so angry. What are you saying? You're saying is, it's not my fault that I lost my temper because you made me so angry. Think about that. You know, let's say you see someone that has everything going for them in life. And unfortunately, you don't have everything going for you in life. And you're jealous. Would you ever say to this person, I am so jealous of you. You have everything and I have nothing, which is never true. No one has everything and no one has nothing. Everyone sees everything externally in someone else. You don't know. You're judging your inside to their outside, but that's a separate subject. But let's just, for theoretical purposes, you say, you make me so jealous. It's your fault. You make me jealous. That wouldn't make any sense, right? You would be embarrassed to say, I'm so jealous of you because you make me so jealous. But people often will say, you made me so angry, and therefore my temper is justified. So you have to first think about anger, for example, and say, is there a time that's justified to be angry? Like, take a piece of paper and say, what are things that I am justified to lose my temper about? Let's say you get angry at your spouse and you yell at your spouse, God forbid, or you get angry at your children and you yell at your children, or whoever, you get angry at your employees or you yell at your employees, right? Now, in the heat of the moment, you lost your temper. And once you lose your temper, you can't think straight. But when you're not angry, when you're calm, take out a piece of paper and say, these are the times it's justified to yell at my spouse. I think you'll have a very hard time writing anything down on the list, because when you're calm, you realize there's never a time that it's justified to yell. These are the times it's justified to yell at my children, to lose my temper at my children. It's never justified, right? So once you have that piece of paper and you were thinking clearly because you weren't angry, you'll realize cognitively, intellectually, that there's never really any justification to be angry. And the reverse is also true. When I'm angry, what am I justified to do in my anger? Nothing, right? So sometimes you have to think about it clearly so that when the emotions start to come, you revert back to what you thought about previously, and therefore you have the intellectual frame of mind to act appropriately, because the mind controls the emotions. The mind gives birth to the emotions, to the feelings. And the more people like to write gratitude journals, for example, right? Now there's being grateful, and then there's feeling gratitude. I could show gratitude, but not feel gratitude. And I could feel gratitude without even behaving and showing that gratitude. What you want to do is become a grateful person internally, not just behaviorally, but internally. So in order to do that, to feel gratitude more, you have to start by thinking about all the things you're grateful for. So that's why people write journals. They sit and write a list of things, and they start to spend time thinking about all the things they should be grateful for. And emotionally, then they start feeling that gratitude, because it all begins with the mind, because the mind controls the heart, obviously. The brain gives birth to the emotions. And that's why we have daily prayers. If we think about the words we say in our daily prayers, why are we thanking God? Because we want to generate the emotion of gratitude. Because the interesting thing is that the internal obviously influences the external, right? If I feel gratitude, I'm going to express gratitude. I'm going to act gratefully, right? If I feel generous, I'm going to give charity. But it's the reverse is also true, and this is very interesting. Sometimes your behaviors trigger your emotions. Because you acted charitable, you start feeling generous. Because you showed gratitude, you start feeling gratitude. So it's not a one-way street, that your internal influences your external, your character influences your behavior. Behaviors also change character. And that's why in Judaism we emphasize mitzvot. Even if you're not feeling the mitzvah, you still do the mitzvah. But if it's not coming from my heart, why should I do it? Poor man asks me for charity. I'm not feeling generous right now. I don't want to give him charity. Judaism says, do the mitzvah anyways. And once you do the mitzvah, you'll start feeling that gratitude, because the action will also influence the emotion. Remember once hearing a story about this guy who was driving home from work, and he sees someone jumping off a bridge trying to commit suicide. He pulls his car over. It was a winter night. He jumps into the river, rescues the guy, calls 911. The ambulance takes him to the hospital. He goes home. He can't sleep all night. He's thinking, why did this guy commit suicide? What's his problems? What is his troubles? First thing in the morning, he gets out of bed. He goes to the fruit store, buys a basket of fruits, and heads to the hospital to visit the man. He visits him and he cheers him up and he starts taking care of him. And then he says to himself later, he says, why do I care about this person so much? I don't know this person. They're a stranger to me. Every day in the newspaper, I read about people doing terrible things like committing suicide. I turn the next page. Why do I care so much about this person? Then he realized, because he acted for this person on their behalf, through his actions, his behaviors, his emotions started to feel compassion for this person. I'm going to just, for a moment, share something that was tragic. Last week, our shul invited Avi Lulu and another member of the Kfar Aza community to Palm Beach. And they spent Hanukkah with us. And then when he went back, was the terrible news that the IDF accidentally murdered his son and killed his son and the other two hostages that broke free. And we were all in so much pain because we knew Avi. We brought Avi to our community. We helped Avi raise money for his community. And I realized that because we were connected to Avi and we had done things for Avi and his family, we felt his pain so much more, as opposed to the other two hostages that we didn't know. So the more you do for someone, by the way, in Hebrew, the word ahava means love, but it means to give. The more you act for someone, the more you feel attached to them. That's why you love your children more than your children could possibly love you, because you do so much more for your children than they do for you. So obviously your internal state of being affects your external, but it's also that your external affects your internal. Your actions, your behavior, start changing your behaviors, and then automatically your internal character will change as well. There's a YouTube video, forgot what it's entitled. I think it's entitled Change Your Words and Change Your Life, or something like that. I'll look it up maybe. It's a very powerful video. And the video shows a blind man sitting on a busy street of a big city. And it's a 2-minute clip. It has millions and millions of views. But basically, you see a blind man with a cardboard box, and the cardboard box says, "I am blind, please help." And he has a cup. And everyone's walking by. It's a sunny day. They're drinking coffee, laughing, having a good time up and down this busy street. And he's sitting there, and every once in a while, somebody puts a coin in his cup. Then in this video, you see a woman walk by, a well-dressed businesswoman. Again, it's a city street, New York City, or whatever, Chicago, whatever. And she walks over to the man, bends down, crouches down, takes his cardboard box, turns it around, his card, his sign, takes out a Sharpie and writes a message and puts it down. And he hears he's blind, he hears somebody doing something with his card, so he feels her shoes and her heels. And she gets up and moves on. Suddenly, clink, 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 everybody's putting money in his cup. And then this whole video is 2.5 minutes. The woman comes back and crouches down to put money in his cup. And he says to her, I'm looking at the video, it has 30 million views. It's called The Power of Words. You could watch the YouTube video later if you want. But basically, he says to her, "What did you write on my sign?" Because he noticed since you wrote the sign, everyone was giving charity to him. And the camera zooms in on the sign in the last seconds of this 2-3 minute video. And this is what the woman wrote. Instead of the original sign, which said, "I am blind, please help," the sign now said, "It's a beautiful day outside, but unfortunately, I can't see it." Now, why did that inspire so many people to give charity? Because when they read that sign, they realized how fortunate they are that they can see the sunlight and the trees and the beautiful day and the buildings and people's faces. And the minute they felt gratitude, they felt compassion for this person. And suddenly the generosity started flowing from people. And so therefore, if you really want to change your behaviors, the best way is to work on changing your internal state of being. And that's why we begin our day with prayer. We say, "God, thank you for opening my eyes. Thank you for providing my needs. Thank you for allowing me to stand erect." On and on and on. Not because God needs all the praises of us, because we need to hear ourselves say how lucky we are, how fortunate we are, how blessed we are. Because if you don't feel gratitude, you're not going to be generous towards others. So having said that the best way to change is to change your character, your internal self, that is a much longer and more difficult process. But I think it was Anne Frank who once said, the great thing about life is that nobody has to even wait a moment to make the world a better place. Whether you feel it or don't feel it, whether you're inspired or you don't feel inspired, right now you can go do a mitzvah, you could go do a good deed, and immediately the world becomes a better place. So you not only change yourself, but you change the whole world. And all of this is taught to us in Judaism. Judaism says, always remember that any change you make, no matter how small it is, has a ripple effect. And Judaism says it has a ripple effect on the whole world. It changes the whole world for the better. And therefore, that's more of a motivation to do a good deed, to make a change, a positive change, because you know that not only will you be the beneficiary of that change, but the whole world will benefit from it. Now, even if you can't see spiritually how the whole world benefits from your one good deed, To quote Maimonides, a person should always see the world balanced 50-50, and your good deeds will tip the scales for good for the whole world. But clearly, if you make a change in your life, your spouse will benefit from it, your children will benefit from it, your friends will benefit from it. So when you're cognizant of the fact of the impact of your change, that any small change in your life will impact so many others, that gives you much more motivation to make changes. Now, let's go over from the character side to the behavioral side. Jewish thought says the following. Jewish thought says there are three components to our behavioral side, our external side. And you're going to be surprised to hear what those three sides are. Because most people don't think of the first one as external, they think of it as internal. Jewish thought says there is machshava, dibur, u'maaseh, thought, speech, and action. They are called, in Hasidic literature, the garments of the soul. So your soul is your character, your essence, your core, your nature. It's hard to change your nature. But human beings are capable of changing their nature. Just a quick story. Maimonides once had a debate with the philosophers of his time whether animals could be trained to change their nature. Maimonides said no, only human beings could change their very nature. That's a human capacity. Animals can't. The philosopher says, yeah, humans can train animals to change their nature. So what did they do? They got these big cats and they trained them to be waiters. And they trained them for months or years, and they had this dinner, and they invited Maimonides, and they rang a bell, and the cats walked in on two legs with the first course and put it down. They were dressed in tuxedos and bow ties, these cats. Second course, third course, everything was going as planned. The philosophers were proving to Maimonides that we could train animals to act like humans. Maimonides sat there calmly, and then at the end of the meal, he opened a little box, and he released from the box a mouse. And the minute the cats saw the mouse, they dropped the trays and started running after the mouse. And Maimonides says, you see, you can't really change. You could train a cat to act like a human, but he's going to revert back to his nature. Only human beings can really change their character to become a different person. That's the internal work, the difficult, challenging work. But behaviors can change much more easily. What are the three garments? And this is the terminology of the Tanya, livushim. What are the three garments of the soul? Thought, speech, and action. Just like your clothing are not internal to you, they're external to you. Thought, speech, and action are your internal garments. Just like your beauty depends on the clothing you wear. The more dressed up you are, the more beautiful you look. The more beautiful your thoughts, speech, and actions are, the more beautiful you are spiritually as a person. Now, let's start with thought. Most people think, well, my thoughts are internal. And of course, your thoughts are internal. But compared to your essence, your thoughts are a garment. Now, why are they called garments? Let's say you don't like your garments. Your garments are dirty. You soiled your garments. All you have to do is go change them, right? It's as easy as that. I don't like this garment, I take it off. Or let's say I just don't like this garment. It's not attractive. I'll put on something more attractive. No problem. Because it's not your essence, it's your garments. Jewish philosophy explains that your thoughts, speech, and actions are the garments of the soul. And yes, you have full control to change any one of them. You don't like the way your thoughts sound? Change your thoughts. And yes, you can't interrupt your thoughts. Thoughts are constant, 24/7. That you don't have choice. You can't stop thinking. But you could change your thoughts. It's very difficult, but if you don't like your thought, if you examine your thoughts, say, I don't like this thought right now. I'm having this negative thought about somebody or something. You could stop the thought and, like changing your garment, I'm going to start thinking something positive now. Is it hard to change your thoughts? Of course, because they're the closest garment. They're like the undergarments. but you can change your thoughts. And a lot of Jewish philosophy talks about changing your thoughts. And you do have control over that. That's behavioral. That's a garment. It's a process of the internal to think, but it's not your essence. In other words, there is intelligence, which is your brain, that's internal. But thoughts are a garment to your intelligence. They facilitate your intelligence, the wisdom of your mind. So therefore, you could always change the thought process. And therefore, you're responsible for your thoughts. You can't say, well, I can't control my thoughts. You could control your thoughts. It's very difficult, but you could stop a thought. You could exchange one thought for another thought. And you could do that by using your mind to say, let me stop and look at all the positive things about this person instead of thinking about the negative things. So we have that control. The next garment is speech. Speech is even easier than thought to change. You don't like the words coming out of your mouth. You don't like what you're saying. Stop saying it. We have many laws in Judaism about not speaking gossip, not speaking slander. We are responsible for our words. We have control, and we could change our words. We could speak, instead of speaking negative, we could speak positive. Instead of speaking with vulgarity, we could speak with respect and with dignity. And of course, the third garment of the soul, of your character, of your essence, is your actions. And surely anyone and everyone can change their actions. And you could even do an action that runs contrary towards your inner character. And that's why we always start with action, because action is the easiest place to make change. There was once a young girl, a woman who came to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. She was a girl in high school, and she said, I'm very selfish. I always think about myself, and it bothers me that I'm only think about myself. And the Rebbe didn't say start like changing your character to become less selfish. The Rebbe said, next time you go to the dining hall, whenever you go to eat in the dormitory dining hall, before you get food for yourself, first spend a few minutes getting food and bringing it to the tables for other people. And only after you've served other people, sit down to eat your own meal. What the Rebbe was saying is start by changing your behaviors, and automatically the behaviors will also have a reverse role on your character. Now, I want to point out something that I think is quite interesting. The beautiful thing about behavior is that not only can you do it instantaneously, you could change your behavior right now. Let's say there's someone you're angry at that you haven't spoken to in, I don't know, a week, a month. You could pick up the phone right now and say, how are you doing? I'm sorry. Right? You could, your emotions, you may not be able to change that easily towards them, but your actions, you could change right now. But it goes further than that. The beautiful thing about the garments of the soul, which is thought, speech, and action, is that you could act and behave better than yourself. What do I mean by that? You know, does it ever happen? I'm sure it happened to me. I'm sure it happened to a lot of people, where you act a certain way, or you speak a certain way, or you even think a certain way, and then you catch yourself. And you say, you know what? I'm so ashamed of the way I acted. I'm so ashamed of the way I spoke. I'm so ashamed of even my internal thoughts, because I am better than that. In other words, you realize that your actions or your speech or your thoughts even was beneath you. It was not a true reflection of who you are, because my character is better than my behavior. My behavior was a poor reflection of my character, because I'm actually better than that. I acted in a way that's beneath my true character and nature, right? And you make up, I'm never going to do that again. I'm never going to speak that way. I'm never going to get angry. I'm never going to insult somebody. I'm never going to speak gossip again. You learn a lesson, right? Because you know that your character and your nature and your soul is better than the way it came across through that behavior. But just like it can go down the ladder and you could behave in a way that's beneath you, you could also choose to act and speak in a way that's above you. In other words, just like you could behave beneath your character, you could behave above your character. And that's the beautiful thing about the garments, right? Just like, I hate to use this analogy because it's a really bad analogy, but let's say it's not a bad analogy, but let's say you have a criminal in a courtroom, right? Whatever he did, he's a, God forbid, could be a murderer, he could be a rapist, he could be a whatever, right? When he walks into court, he comes in with a suit and a tie. If you met him on the street, you'd think he was a respectable person. He's dressing above his true essence. His true essence was that he's a criminal, but he's acting in a better way. Well, that's a very extreme example, right? But the point is, your garments could represent you more than you are without getting extreme of a criminal. A person could dress and make an appearance that they're better than they truly are, or less. You could have somebody who's the most brilliant, accomplished person. He could walk around like a homeless person, but his essence is even greater than it's reflected in his actions. Sometimes our actions are beneath us, but sometimes we could choose actions that are better than us. What do I mean by that? We do this all the time. You hear a very brilliant quote or a very brilliant idea, and you repeat that brilliant idea to others. It could be a Dvar Torah, for example, right? Now, your character may not be on the level of that message, but your garments of speech can communicate a level of behavior that is even beyond the way you are internally in your character. You could act in a way, let's say you're not feeling generous, you're feeling stingy, for example, right? But you could act generously. You could choose an action, a behavior that's above your pay grade, so to speak, above your true character. You don't have to wait to change your nature. You could be feeling jealousy, but you can say, I'm not going to act on that jealousy. I'm going to act generous and be happy for that person rather than feel resentment towards that person. So your actions you have the opportunity to change them immediately. And you can even choose a dress code of thought, speech, and action that's above who you truly are. And that's why it says you should always memorize thoughts of Torah, because when you're having negative thoughts, you could always exchange them for positive thoughts, for thoughts of Torah. And then you're putting on God's garments. You're getting God's thoughts, God's speech, God's actions. So you have this range of possibilities of things that you can choose that's above your true essence. So Judaism says the most important thing is your actions, mitzvot, right? God is more concerned about our behavior than anything else. So let's use the time we have left to talk about practical tools, because it's coming to January 1st, and we may understand, about character versus behavior, and change your behaviors, and then your character will change too. But what are some practical tools to make change? And human nature is that we are all very resistant to change. Part of it is the fear of the unknown. Part of it is inertia. But to live is to grow, and to grow is to change. And a lot of times we have to realize, and this is part of the understanding the dynamics, is that a lot of the behaviors we adopted in childhood. And we never matured out of those behaviors. So and this is what therapy is all about, right? When we're children, we adopt coping mechanisms for different situations. But we have to realize, I'm not that 5-year-old kid anymore. I'm not that 8-year-old kid. I'm an adult now. And I have to grow and I have to mature. And just because I responded to certain things when I was a kid in certain ways, whether it was anger or, jealousy or whatever it was, I'm responsible now as an adult to mature beyond those childhood impulses that I developed that became my nature. And now I have to form adult, mature habits if these are unbecoming. But the first thing you have to be able to believe is that not just that I'm capable of change, but that I really just have to go back to who I really am. The word teshuvah means return. It implies that you're going back to your true essence. You see, before you adopted these negative habits, which came from different circumstances in your life, it could have been traumatic situations or negative situations in your life that you had to deal with, and you learned these habits that aren't helping you now. They're not beneficial to you anymore. They're hindering you. You were an innocent, pure child without these negative traits. And therefore, teshuvah, the very name teshuvah, implies that you're going back to who you really are. So one of this, and now let's talk about some of the practical tools. The first practical tool, and this is just with New Year's coming up, resolutions. By all means, make a resolution. But here's what you should do. There's a famous passage in the Talmud. The Talmud says, God says, open up the door like the hole of a needle, and I'll expand that hole of a needle to the size of the entrance of a grand ballroom. What is the Talmud saying? What the Talmud saying is, when you think about change, don't think about big changes, because that's a sure way to fail. It could be like the hole of a needle, a small, tiny change. There's something called hachlata, a resolution, like New Year's resolutions, or Kabbalah, something you accept upon yourself. There's a concept called minimum maximum, which means make the minimum resolution. And then gain confidence that you fulfill that resolution. And only when you gain confidence in your ability to keep your resolutions, then you move on to a bigger resolution. Because first you have to prove to yourself that I am capable of fulfilling my resolutions. Now, you could take a small resolution. Let's say you don't talk to your parents more than once a year. And you say, you know what, I should really be a better son. I should call my parents more often. So instead of saying I'm going to call my parents every day, you know what, I'm going to start, I call them once a year. I'm going to call them once a month. Small resolution, small change. Now, by all means, if you could exceed your resolution and call them every week, great. But my resolution was once a month. So if I keep the resolution, I now build confidence that I am capable of making a resolution and keeping it. And if I exceeded it, I resolved to do it once a month and I did it once a week, even better. Let's use a religious example. I haven't been to shul since high holidays. I'm going to make a resolution. I'm going to go once a month to shul. And once you get that down, maybe I'll go to 2 weeks a month, or whatever it may be. I'll stop putting on to fill in once a week, once a month. It doesn't matter how small it is. First, show yourself that I could make a resolution and keep it. Because if you make a big resolution, you don't keep it. Why do most resolutions fail? Statistics show within a month after January 1st, most people drop their resolutions. Because the guy says, a guy hasn't been in a gym in a year. I'm going to go to the gym every morning, 6 o'clock. Well, after 3 days, he gives up and he's like, forget it. I failed. I lost. As opposed to saying, I'll go to the gym once a month. I say, wow, I kept my resolution. I even did better than my resolution. I went twice a month. You know, in Hebrew, the word for sin is chet. The word chet doesn't really mean sin. It means missing the mark. Now, imagine you're an archer and you're shooting at a bullseye and you miss. What do? You try again. So sometimes we miss the mark and we give up. Instead of giving up, we have to, the Talmud says, if you grab too much, you don't grab anything. Right? So yeah, and there's a prayer we say, God, remove the evil inclination from before us and from behind us. So the Rabbi say, I understand what it means to remove the evil inclination from before us, because he's tempting us and leading us astray. But why do we have to move the evil inclination from behind us? And the Rabbi says sometimes the evil inclination has a different tactic. You know what they do? They go behind you and they push you and they go faster, do more, until you fall on your face. So there's two strategies the evil inclination has. One is he leads you astray with negative urges and temptations. The other one is he propels you forward with such speed that you collapse and that you fall on your face. There's another interesting point, and that is sometimes we don't have to change necessarily. Sometimes we just have to figure out, how can I use my character in a positive way? So take, for example, jealousy. Jealousy is a bad thing, right? But 1 minute, it's not so bad. If you're using your jealousy for good things, let's say I'm jealous of someone, that this person is such a good father. I love the way he devotes so much time to his children. I'm jealous. I want to be such a good father. That's a positive jealousy. Let's say I'm jealous. This person is so kind. I'm jealous. I want to be as kind, or I want to be as charitable, or I want to be as learned as this person. That's a positive use of jealousy. So if you have a tendency to be very jealous and never content with what you have, you just have to channel it from material things to spiritual things. And suddenly your jealousy is helping you, not hurting you. And the same thing is almost in every area of life. In most cases, you could say, what is my character trait that I don't like? And how can I use it in a positive way? If you have anger in you, okay, how can I be angry at the injustices of the world and fight with all my strength to correct those injustices? Because I'm so angry when I see evil, when I see innocent people suffering. So a lot of times change doesn't mean to change your essence, because that's a very difficult thing, to change your very nature. But you could sometimes do something which is a little easier, which is channel it in a positive direction and use it for something that is good and constructive, rather than something that is negative and improper. One more practical advice, and then we'll use the last few minutes to check the chat box and see if anyone has any questions or thoughts, because I want to leave a little bit of time. And that is, like in most areas of life, if you want to really change something, you need external help sometimes. Because, first of all, we have biases, we have blind spots. But in addition to that, we all need structure and encouragement and support. There's a reason why people go to support groups to make changes in their lives, because we need encouragement and positive support of others to make positive changes. So let's say you're financially you're a mess. Your finances are in disarray. You don't just sit down and say, I'm going to change it myself. You go see a financial planner and you say, okay, how can I make some structure, positive change in my life, right? Let's say your health is not good. You go to a doctor and say, listen, help me get on a healthy path here, right? In most areas of life, if we're really serious about changing things, you want to improve your marriage, right? You go to a professional. You go to somebody who could help you. Well, Pirkei Avot says that thousands of years ago. Aseh lecha rav, appoint for yourself a teacher. Uknei lecha chaver. We all need positive influences. We need good teachers, mentors, spiritual guides, and we need good friends, positive influences. If you want to change, you have to put yourself in an environment that's going to be beneficial for that change. And what that does is it also puts you in a situation where you're held accountable by others. So many people have told me, I wanted to start exercising, but I knew I would never go to the gym, so I hired a trainer. And I pay, right? And now I have to show up every day, right? Well, you could say to someone, we're going to study Torah every week on Tuesday nights. We're going to get together and we're going to study, right? Now there's somebody who holds you accountable for that, right? So we have to realize sometimes that we don't always have the strength to make proper changes. But as long as you know what you want to change and how you want to change that, then you need people around you, whether it's colleagues, friends, and it doesn't have to be many. It could be one good friend or one good teacher or one good coach or one good mentor, right? And that's really what, in a way, when I think of shul, right, synagogue, right? You walk into shul on Shabbos, you're surrounded by hundreds of people, or no matter how many people, it doesn't matter. They all want one thing in life. They want to grow. They want to be better, right? There's certain places that naturally are going to, you go to a bar, who are you going to be hanging around with? What kind of people go out to drink? Are they going to lift you up? Are they going to elevate you? But you walk into a shul, you're in an environment that's spiritual. You're going to hear words of Torah. You're going to hear words of prayer. You're setting yourself up for success. And the same thing is true. You sign up for a course. You sign up for a seminar. You take an online, anything. You have to take positive actions. And I'm just going to tell you that, and I'll conclude with this because we can go on and on. But the word in Hebrew for habit is hergel. Hebrew, the word for habit is hergel. The root of the word hergel is regel, your foot, right? And what it's implying is that in order to change your character, you have to first change your habits. And in order to change your habits, you have to take action. You have to pick your feet up and go and do and attend and participate and take action. In other words, I could think all day. See, that's the difference between the internal and the external. On the one hand, you want your external behaviors to change as a result of your internal feelings. You want to be truly a generous person, and your charity comes from true generosity, right? You want your compassion and empathy to come from a place where you're truly empathetic. You're not just acting that way, right? But on the other hand, while yes, on the one hand, you want it to come from an internal place. On the other hand, we all have to recognize that thoughts and internals don't change. So for example, is it better to meditate for an hour how much you love your child? Or is it, or you, how much you love your spouse, or how much you love your parent? Or is it better to pick up the phone and spend 5 minutes on the phone telling them how much you love them? Well, internally, you spent an hour meditating about your deep love for your spouse or your child. But practically, the 5-minute phone call to your mother, to your father, to your parent, to whoever it is, and telling them how much you love them accomplished more than an hour of internal meditation. So there's this balance. Yes, we want to be the best we can internally, but Judaism is very much about working on your internal self and becoming the best version of yourself, and always growing and always changing. And that's why every year we have Rosh Hashanah to look at ourselves and say, how can I do better this year? Every year has to bring growth, and every day has to bring growth. We say the bedtime Shema every night and resolve to be better the next day. Constant growth, but also realizing that the world doesn't change for my internal character. The world only changes for my actions. And there's always that balance in Judaism. First of all, Judaism says, some people say, well, I'm a hypocrite. If I don't really feel generous, why should I give charity? No, you're not a hypocrite. Even if you don't feel generous, you should still give charity, because your action is what matters. The poor man doesn't care how generous you are in your spirit. The poor man cares that he got money to go buy food or pay his rent. So your actions, in a way, your behavior is what matters most. It's all about the mitzvah, Judaism says. On the other hand, the more your mitzvos are inspired by a better internal, a better self, building a better self will inspire more actions. So it's this catch-22. Yes, we want our actions to be inspired by a better character, but also your actions will inspire your character to grow. But also you can't wait for your character to be the right character in order to act properly, because it's just going to take too long. Your family can't wait. Your community can't wait. The world can't wait for you to get better in order to be able to start doing good deeds in this world. So the actions happen immediately. And the beautiful thing, like I said, is you could choose actions and thoughts and words that are even beyond yourself. The practical example, right? Someone gives you a great idea. It wasn't your idea. Your brain didn't think of that good idea. Or you watch someone else do something really great. It came out of their brain. They thought of this amazing thing to do, but you borrowed their idea and you did it in your life. So you saw someone do something really special for their family. You didn't think of it. It's not your character to even think of such a great thing. But now you said, I want to wear that garment. I want to be that incredible father, a husband, a wife, whatever, right? I'm going to borrow that beautiful idea that they generated from their character, from their noble character. And maybe my character is not so noble, but my actions could be noble, because I could dress above my level, so to speak. Just like you could act beneath yourself, you could act above yourself. And that's the beauty of garments. You can pick and choose your garments, your wardrobe. But what's more important is not your material wardrobe and how you look physically and how expensive your clothing are. Your real garments are your thought, speech, and action. And those are the areas we have most control. You can't always control your feelings. You have to be a very special person to, like, oh, I want to feel loving right now towards this person, so I'm going to like feel loving. That's harder, okay? I want to feel generous towards this person. So, that doesn't happen so quickly. But in a moment, you could act lovingly, you could speak lovingly, you could even think loving thoughts. In a moment, you could act generous, speak generously, right? And a lot of times, generosity is just words. It's so unbelievable, but it doesn't even cost you anything. All you have to do is speak words of generosity. And you may not even feel those words of generosity. You may feel this person is an annoyance to me, but I'm not going to act annoyed. I'm going to act generous with my words. And as far as they're concerned, they heard loving, encouraging, generous words. So this is obviously a very big subject, but I'm happy the class came up now, because before New Year's, we should think about positive changes we can make in our lives. And as I told you, start with something small. As the Talmud says, open up the door like the hole of a needle, and slowly that hole of a needle will expand. But you have to build confidence in your ability to keep a resolution. And instead of saying, I'm going to change everything, I'm going to change one thing at a time, and slowly I'm going to grow. I'll just tell you, as a rabbi, if somebody comes to me and says, Rabbi, I want to become religious, starting today, kosher, Shabbos, everything. I'm like, whoa, slow it down, right? Because that's not going to last. Start by doing one small mitzvah, then increase another mitzvah. And gradually you'll become more observant. Anything that goes too quick is not good. So if anyone has any questions or thoughts, I'm just going to check the chat box. I thank you all for joining today. Okay, so someone made a comment. Someone made a comment that sometimes you are ready to change, but the other person is not ready to change. And obviously that's the case. We all know that change could only happen if a person desires it and wants it. But I do think that sometimes, to whoever asked that question, don't worry about the other person. You start making changes. Don't wait for them to be willing to make changes. You start making changes. And when you start making changes in the relationship, you're already changing them, whether they know it or not, because they're reacting to a changed person. So automatically they're changing through you. And ultimately your changes can and will inspire them to make changes as well. So I know the dilemma the person's saying is like, my marriage, my relationship with my kid, my relationship with my friend, with my boss, it's not the way. And I'm ready to make changes, but they're not ready. And you're right, you can't control other people. Unfortunately, you can't, but you shouldn't. Your responsibility is to change yourself. And if you start changing yourself, whether you know it or not, whether you realize it or not, whether they even realize it or not, they will start changing as well, because they will automatically notice your changes if they're real and genuine. And ultimately, they will start reacting to the new version of you, which will force them to change and hopefully inspire them to want to change, because they will see the beneficial, positive results of the change that you have made. But ultimately, you're right. You could only be responsible for yourself. I hope everyone is doing well, and I wish everyone a English Shana Tova, good year. I always point out that in the English calendar, we say Happy New Year. In the Hebrew calendar, we say Shana Tova, good year. Happiness is so important. And by the way, that's another example. I once heard that stewardesses are told to stand in front of a mirror in the morning and smile at the mirror. Because if you practice being happy, it will make you happier, right? So actions do lead to internal change as well, even if they're external and superficial. But in Judaism, we say, may you have a Shana Tova, good year, because the goal of life is to be good, not to be happy. There are a lot of people who are happy, but their happiness is at the expense of other people's happinesses. So therefore, it's not a real happiness. It's not a meaningful happiness. Goodness will always bring happiness. Happiness will not necessarily, it could bring goodness, but not necessarily. So what we aim for is goodness, a good year. Happiness, that is a way to achieve goodness, because if you're happy, you're more energetic, you feel more generous when you're happy, you could become a better person through happiness. But happiness is a means to an end. Our ultimate objective is, more than happiness, is to be good. And that's why Same thing with children. What do we want for our children? We want our children to be good people. Happy, of course, but even more important is good. And I think we all understand that, right? If your son says, Mom, Dad, I don't want to go to college and get a real job. I just want to live on the beach in California and go surfing every day. And I'll be very happy doing surfing all day. I'm a surf bum, right? I don't know what they call it, right? You'll say, look, I want you to be happy, but you got to do something meaningful with your life. You have to contribute to this world. You have to make an impact. Ultimately, we want for our children a meaningful, good life and a happy life, but not happy at the expense of meaningfulness and goodness. And as opposed to, and the same thing is with God. God wants us to have meaningful lives, impactful lives, good lives, not just happy lives. So everyone should have a good year and a happy year, but most importantly, focus on the good and the happiness will come automatically. Thank you, everybody. It's good to see everyone, and Happy New Year and a good New Year. Shana Tova. See you all soon, hopefully.